The first sound my wife heard that morning was metal biting metal. At 5:12 a.m., Claire touched my shoulder in the dark and whispered, "Someone's in the garage." I still remember the cold air against my skin when my feet hit the hardwood floor, the faint smell of rain drifting through the cracked bedroom window, and beneath it something sharper, machine oil and cut steel. Then came that sound again. Clang. A bolt cutter chewing through my father's old security chain. Most people think a garage is where you keep holiday boxes and lawn tools. Ours held 40 years of legacy. My father's workbench. Restored carburetors lined like trophies. File drawers full of deeds, surveys, permits. Every inch of that place had a history, and somebody was breaking into it before sunrise. I moved toward the hallway, but Claire was already ahead of me. Barefoot. Calm. More calm than I was. She glanced at the security monitor by the kitchen and froze for half a second, just enough for me to feel my stomach drop. Two men in HOA enforcement jackets stood inside my garage, flashlights sweeping over tool chests, one of them peeling an orange notice across my cabinet doors like he owned the place. And standing outside by the driveway in a white Lexus was Darlene Whitmore, HOA president, wrapped in a cream-colored coat, like she was attending a ribbon cutting instead of a burglary. What she didn't know was Claire had started recording before I even made it down the stairs. That woman had a mind like a courtroom trap. She didn't panic. She hunted. The smell of coffee from last night still lingered in the kitchen as she picked up her phone and whispered, "Don't stop them." I looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Two strangers were in my garage cutting locks, and she was telling me to wait. But then I saw that look in her eyes. The same look she had when she caught a contractor trying to forge a lien against our property 2 years earlier. Ice cold. Calculating. Through the monitor, we watched one of the men open my father's old steel filing drawer. The one with the original plat maps. The one nobody but family should touch. My jaw clenched so hard I could taste copper. Darlene had spent months citing us for phantom violations, unsightly workshop activity, unauthorized equipment, community aesthetic interference. Fancy words for wanting my garage. But breaking in before dawn, that was new. Claire touched the screen, zoomed in, and smiled. "Look at his badge," she said. It wasn't a county code badge. It was fake. Cheap metal. Costume authority. That's when I realized something bigger was happening. This wasn't an inspection. This was a raid. And they had picked the wrong house. The security camera caught everything. The chain falling to the floor, the forged seizure notice, Todd Keegan stuffing documents into an HOA evidence box. But the detail I remember most was Darlene checking her watch, smug as a queen surveying conquered land. She thought we were asleep. She thought she was writing the ending. Then Claire opened the front door. Slow, deliberate, porch light flooding the driveway. Her voice cut through the dawn like a judge calling court to order. "Morning, officers," she said. "You might want to smile. You're live." And in that moment, before any of them understood what she meant, the whole game changed. The man with the fake badge turned so fast he nearly dropped the evidence box. For a second, nobody moved. The porch light washed the driveway in pale yellow, and all I could hear was the soft electrical hum from the garage opener and rainwater ticking off the gutters. Claire stood there in flannel pajama pants and a gray sweatshirt, phone raised, expression calm enough to make grown men nervous. Darlene tried to recover first. She always did. Her smile snapped into place like she had rehearsed it. "Claire, thank goodness you are awake. We are conducting an emergency compliance inspection." Claire tilted her head. "At 5 in the morning, after cutting a private lock." Even from the porch I could smell the hot metal where the chain had been severed. Todd Keegan adjusted his jacket and tried to puff himself up. "Ma'am, your garage has been cited for unauthorized hazardous storage." My wife looked past him into the workshop and said, "That cabinet you opened contains county land records. The drawer you touched is protected under private property law, and your face is on 3 cameras." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Darlene's posture shifted. Tiny thing, but I caught it. Her confidence flickered. She was not dealing with a sleepy homeowner anymore. She was standing in front of Claire Mercer when Claire had already solved the board before they knew there was a game. She stepped off the porch and walked right toward them, slow and steady over wet concrete. I could smell rain and motor oil mixing in the dawn. My pulse was pounding so hard it felt louder than the crickets. "You should leave," Todd muttered. "You are interfering with HOA authority." Claire actually smiled. "Authority?" she said. "Show me your warrant." Silence. Just the soft hiss of the security light. Todd looked at Darlene. Darlene looked at the ground. That was the first crack. Then Claire did something I still think about. She pointed at my father's old steel workbench and said, "See that drawer you opened?" Todd nodded without meaning to. "There is a recorder inside it. Been running since you entered." I had forgotten that recorder even existed. My father installed it in the 1990s after a break-in at his machine shop. Planting details like that was his religion. Suddenly, every object in that garage felt alive. Watching. Waiting. Darlene tried one last bluff. "This property may fall under community seizure due to covenant violations." Claire pulled folded papers from her sweatshirt pocket. She had slept with the deed packet beside the bed after months of HOA harassment. "Interesting," she said, "because according to the original subdivision exclusion filed in 1987, this garage sits outside your covenants." Todd's face drained. Even in dim light I saw it. That was when I realized this was never about clutter or code enforcement. They thought if they moved fast enough and looked official enough, they could manufacture control. But Claire had done something they never imagined. She let them walk in, let them touch evidence, let them commit to the lie. And then she handed me a look that meant do not interrupt. The hunter had the scent. Darlene started backing toward her Lexus. "Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding." Claire lifted her phone. "No misunderstanding. Just trespass, impersonation, and attempted unlawful seizure before sunrise." Then she said something that made my blood run electric. "Do not go too far, Darlene. The sheriff is already on his way." Todd turned toward the street, so fast he bumped the tool chest. Wrenches rattled. A socket rolled across concrete and spun in a tight metallic circle before falling still. Funny how I still hear that sound. Because that was the moment the raid stopped being their operation and started becoming our trap. The sheriff arrived 12 minutes later, but those 12 minutes stretched like an hour. Nobody left. Nobody breathed easy. Todd stood by the garage opening pretending to study his clipboard, but his hand shook enough to rattle the metal clip. Darlene stayed beside her Lexus, tapping one polished fingernail against the door frame, trying to look inconvenienced instead of cornered. The eastern sky was turning pale silver, and that cold dawn light made everything look too honest to hide in. Claire never lowered her phone. She walked into the garage as if she owned every inch of the morning, which she did, and started quietly taking inventory. "Missing nothing," she said, almost to herself. "That matters." I followed her inside and watched her run a finger across my father's old workbench. The worn oak top still held burn marks from soldering jobs done decades ago. There was a smell in there I had known since childhood: grease, cedar dust, old paper. Home. And standing in that smell while strangers tried to claim it did something to me I still cannot explain. It stopped being about an HOA. It became personal. Claire pulled one old file box from under the bench and handed me a yellow folder. "Read the label." My throat tightened when I saw my father's handwriting. "Easement exclusion records." She whispered, "This is why they came." That hit me harder than anything Darlene had done. This was not random harassment. This was targeted. Claire had suspected it for months. I had called her cautious. She had called it pattern recognition. She was right. Again, the red and blue flash of the sheriff's cruiser rolled over the wet pavement, reflections shimmering in puddles like broken glass. Deputy Nolan stepped out first, broad-shouldered, steady voice, the kind of man who looked at people before paperwork. He glanced at the cut chain on the ground, then at Todd's fake badge. I watched his eyebrow rise half an inch. Tiny movement. Huge meaning. "Morning," he said. "Someone want to explain why I have a trespass complaint before sunrise?" Darlene launched into performance mode. "Deputy, this is an authorized HOA enforcement action." Nolan held up a hand. "I was not speaking to you yet." Silence. Sharp as winter air. Then Claire handed him her phone. Video footage. Timestamps. Audio. Todd cutting the chain. Darlene directing from the driveway. Every second gift wrapped in evidence. Nolan watched 20 seconds and exhaled through his nose. Interesting. That one word carried weight. Todd tried one last defense. "We had probable covenant authority." Claire stepped beside the old steel drawer and tapped it twice. "Funny. Because your authority opened a drawer containing county corruption complaint records filed against this HOA board." Even I froze. She had not told me she found those. That was the first glimpse of how far ahead she was playing. Darlene's face went still in a way that looked almost fragile. Nolan looked from her to Claire and back again. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said slowly, "why exactly was your board attempting access to legal records at 5 in the morning?" No answer. Just rain dripping off the gutters. Somewhere a mockingbird started up with the sunrise. Ordinary sounds. Extraordinary moment. Then Nolan bent, picked up the severed lock from the driveway, weighed it in his hand, and said words I will never forget. This stopped being an HOA dispute the second somebody cut private security. Claire met my eyes then, and I understood something dangerous and beautiful. The break-in was not the climax. It was bait, and she had just let the first piece of a much bigger trap snap shut. After the sheriff left with copies of the footage and Todd's fake credentials photographed, the neighborhood woke up to the smell of wet grass and gossip. By 8 o'clock, blinds were shifting all down Willow Creek Lane. Doors cracked open. Coffee mugs appeared on porches. People had heard the cruiser, seen the flashing lights, watched Darlene's white Lexus pull away without her usual queen of the subdivision posture. But what none of them knew was Claire was just getting started. She did not celebrate, did not rant. She made pancakes while county records sat spread across our kitchen table like evidence in a war room. Syrup warmed on the stove while she highlighted names, parcel numbers, signatures. It felt surreal, sunlight pouring through the windows while my wife quietly dismantled a corruption pattern over breakfast. "Look at this," she said, sliding me a stack of old board minutes. The paper smelled faintly of mildew and toner. Buried in maintenance resolutions were repeated attempts to reclassify detached garages as shared utility structures. Every motion sponsored by Darlene. Every failed vote resurfacing every 18 months. "She has been trying to take these properties for years," Claire said. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I looked toward the garage through the back window. My father's workshop sat there in morning light, innocent as ever, but now it felt like contested ground. Then Claire showed me the real bomb. A folder marked Keegan Consulting Services. Todd was not an officer. He was a private contractor paid through HOA reserve funds, paid to conduct special compliance actions. The phrase made my skin crawl. She had found reimbursements, off-book fees, even legal invoices tied to lien threats against elderly homeowners. This was bigger than us. "They raid with paperwork first," Claire said. "When that fails, they manufacture emergencies." She spoke so calmly it was almost unnerving, like she had stepped into her natural habitat. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Donnelly from 3 houses over. Widow. 80 if she was a day. Trembling hands clutching an envelope. "I heard what happened," she whispered. "They tried something similar with my shed last year." Inside the envelope were violation letters, threatening assessments, notices signed by Todd. More pattern. More plant. Every new document felt like another wrench clicking into place. By afternoon, our dining room looked like a legal archive. Claire pinned notes, circled names, built timelines. She moved with the precision of someone assembling a machine. Then she stopped and said something that made the room go still. "We are not reporting this to the board." I frowned. "Why not?" She looked up. "Because I want them comfortable." That sentence carried the same chill as bolt cutters before dawn. She was letting prey wander. At sunset, Darlene sent an email blast to the neighborhood claiming a misunderstanding had occurred during a routine inspection. Routine inspection. Claire laughed out loud when she read it. "Good," she said. "She is lying in writing now." Then she did something I did not expect. She replied apologizing for any confusion and invited the board to a follow-up property walkthrough Saturday morning. I stared at her. "You invited them back?" Claire nodded and folded the laptop shut. Second break-ins reveal intent. The smell of motor oil drifted from the garage as evening settled in. Cicadas started up. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler clicked rhythmically through the dark. Ordinary suburban sounds. But inside our house, something had shifted. This was no longer defense. Claire was constructing a stage, and every lie Darlene told was walking itself right where she wanted it. Saturday arrived carrying the smell of cut grass and hot asphalt. One of those bright suburban mornings that makes trouble look harmless. By 9 o'clock, the trap was set. Claire had polished the old brass handle on my father's steel filing drawer like it mattered, because to her every detail mattered. The severed lock from the first break-in sat on the workbench exactly where Deputy Nolan had placed it, untouched, a silent witness. Hidden cameras were live. Audio recorders armed. Every document laid where curious hands would reach. Claire wore jeans, boots, and a blue Oxford shirt, looking less like a homeowner than someone conducting an audit. Calm scared me more than anger ever could. At 9:15, Darlene arrived with 2 board members I barely knew, plus Todd, now suddenly calling himself a compliance consultant instead of an officer. That alone told Claire her bait had worked. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and felt my pulse rise with the same metallic taste I used to get before a high school championship game. But Claire just opened the garage and smiled like she was hosting brunch. "Come in," she said. "Let us clear up this misunderstanding." Darlene stepped inside, with fake politeness dripping off every word. "We appreciate your cooperation." She moved straight toward the filing cabinets, too quickly for it to be casual. Predator behavior. Claire noticed. Of course she noticed. She guided them through the workshop as if giving a museum tour. My father's old drill press. Vintage carburetors. Property plats framed on the wall. Every stop a plant. Every object baited. Then Darlene made the move Claire had predicted. "Perhaps we should inspect storage records related to covenant classification," she said, hand already reaching for the steel drawer. Claire stepped aside. "Let her. That still amazes me." She let her touch the trigger. Darlene slid open the drawer and started flipping through folders. Easements. Surveys. Utility maps. Then she found the red file. The one Claire placed on top on purpose. Shared access conversion proposal. Darlene's eyes lit for half a second. Greed has a posture. I saw it. She slipped the file halfway into her tote bag, thinking nobody noticed. But every camera noticed. Every microphone noticed. Claire noticed. She just kept talking about workshop zoning as if nothing happened. My skin buzzed. I wanted to call it out. Stop it. End it. But Claire gave me the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Then Todd wandered toward the back cabinet where my father kept notarized deed copies. He tested the handle. Locked. "What is in there?" he asked too casually. Claire answered, "Evidence you probably do not want to tamper with twice." Todd laughed. "Forced. Dry." And there it was. The second break-in. Not with bolt cutters this time. With theft under invitation. Intent exposed in broad daylight. Then came the sound I had been waiting for. A car door outside. Tires over gravel. Another vehicle pulling up. Darlene heard it too. And stiffened. Through the garage window, I saw Deputy Nolan's county cruiser rolling into the drive, followed by a silver sedan I did not recognize. Claire looked at me, and for the first time all week let herself smile. Real smile. "Perfect timing," she said. The silver sedan door opened, and out stepped a woman in a navy suit carrying a leather case. Darlene went pale. "Who was that?" Todd whispered. Claire folded her arms. "County fraud investigator." The air seemed to change temperature. Even the garage felt still. Oil smell. Dust motes in sunlight. The old wall clock ticking. Every planted detail waiting for payoff. Then Claire pointed calmly at Darlene's tote bag. "Before anyone leaves," she said, "I believe you are carrying a document that belongs to me." And in that moment, I realized my wife had not invited them over for clarification. She had staged an evidence collection. The county fraud investigator introduced herself as Marlene Shaw, and the moment she stepped into that garage, the air felt tighter, almost pressurized. Navy suit crisp as a blade, leather folio under one arm, eyes that missed nothing. She did not waste words. She looked at Darlene's tote bag, then at the red file sticking out half an inch, and said, "Ma'am, I suggest you put that back where you found it." You could hear the wall clock ticking. Even Todd stopped pretending confidence. Darlene tried a laugh that came out brittle. "This is absurd. We were reviewing community records." Marlene glanced at Claire. Community records inside a private tote bag? That silence hit harder than any accusation. Claire moved to the workbench and touched the severed lock lying there like an exhibit marker. "This is evidence item 1, she said. Today was evidence item 2. I watched the board members who came with Darlene slowly drift away from her side, instinctively creating distance, like people stepping back from a fire they just noticed. Deputy Nolan folded his arms and asked Todd for his consulting credentials. Todd fumbled through his clipboard, papers slipping, the smell of old carbon copies and sweat suddenly thick in the room. Then Marlene opened her folio and laid photographs across my father's workbench. Property liens, reserve fund transfers, contractor invoices tied to Keegan Consulting, some marked with signatures I recognized from HOA meetings. My stomach dropped. Claire had known there was rot. I had not grasped how deep it ran. This board has been under quiet review for 6 months, Marlene said. This morning accelerated things. Darlene's lipstick smile finally vanished. For the first time she looked old. Cornered. Real. This is retaliation, she snapped. These people are hostile to community governance. Claire gave the slightest nod, almost amused. Governance does not arrive with bolt cutters before sunrise. Even Nolan smirked at that. Then came the twist I had not seen coming. Marlene pulled one yellow document from her folio and slid it toward me. Original county filing from 1987. My father's handwritten complaint against the developer who created this subdivision. Attached was a notation I had never seen. Fraud referral initiated, unresolved. The same developer who helped form the HOA. My pulse pounded in my ears. The garage was never random. It held the one property excluded from a land conversion scheme my father had challenged decades ago. Claire had suspected history was repeating. She had baited them into proving it. Darlene looked at the paper and actually whispered, "That should have been archived." Marlene's eyebrow lifted. Interesting choice of words. That was the sound of a trap closing. Todd tried edging toward the driveway, but Nolan stepped into the path, polite as Sunday church. Nobody is leaving until we inventory what was handled. Outside, neighbors had started gathering at mailboxes pretending to check Saturday Post. Watching. Word was spreading in real time. Through the open garage, I could hear sprinklers ticking and somebody's lawn mower in the distance. Ordinary suburbia, carrying on while a private empire cracked apart on my concrete floor. Then Claire reached into the steel drawer and pulled out a cassette recorder no bigger than a paperback. My father's recorder. The one from part 1. She pressed play. Static hiss. Then clear audio from the dawn raid. Todd saying, "Take the deed. Files first." Darlene answering, "Once the garage converts, the parcel follows." Nobody breathed. Even the wall clock seemed to stop. Marlene slowly closed her folio and said, "Well, that sounds very much like conspiracy." Claire looked at me, eyes bright with that dangerous calm, and I understood the deepest twist of all. My wife had not merely defended our home. She had resurrected a case buried for 40 years and walked the people responsible right back into it. The recording ended and the garage sat in a silence so heavy it almost hummed. Then everything started moving at once. Marlene Shaw began tagging documents with colored tabs from her folio, while Deputy Nolan photographed the red file, the cut lock, Todd's clipboard, even the old steel drawer. Like every object had become testimony. Darlene tried recovering her voice. This is being taken completely out of context. But that polished certainty she wore like perfume was gone. Her words sounded thin now. Todd looked ready to melt through the concrete. Outside, neighbors had drifted closer under the excuse of walking dogs and collecting mail, but nobody was fooling anybody. The whole subdivision could feel a reckoning in the air. Claire did not raise her voice once. That was the part that kept stunning me. She stood by the workbench with one hand resting on my father's old vise and spoke like she was reading settled law. "You attempted unlawful conversion of private property under fabricated authority. Twice." Even the board members who came with Darlene would not meet her eyes. Then Marlene asked a question that changed the temperature again. "Mrs. Whitmore, where is the reserve account ledger for special compliance expenditures?" Darlene hesitated 1 second too long. That was enough. Marlene turned to Claire. "You mentioned reimbursements tied to elderly homeowners." Claire reached into a banker's box and pulled 3 folders. Mrs. Donnelly's letters. Lien threats. Payment demands. Quiet extortion wearing neighborhood stationery. She had organized it all alphabetically. Of course she had. The smell of warm dust and machine oil mixed with fresh-cut grass drifting through the open garage while the fraud. Investigator flipped pages. "This may involve elder abuse statutes," Marlene said. One of the board members actually stepped backward at that. Todd muttered, "I was only following board directives." Claire looked at him with almost clinical pity. "You charge $200 an hour to do it." Nolan wrote something down. Pen scratching paper sounded louder than the lawn mower still buzzing somewhere down the block. Then Darlene made the mistake that finished her. She pointed at Claire and snapped, "You set this up." My wife nodded. Yes. No denial. No apology. Just truth sharpened into steel. Because honest people do not enter garages before dawn with bolt cutters. Even Marlene let out the faintest breath that might have been a laugh. And then Claire played her final planted card. She opened the lowest drawer in my father's cabinet and removed a survey tube I had not seen since his funeral. Rolled parchment crackled as she spread it across the bench. Original parcel map. But highlighted in blue was an unrecorded easement corridor running under 3 HOA common lots. Utility access the board had no legal right to obstruct. My father had retained controlling rights over part of the subdivision entrance itself. I stared at it like discovering buried treasure in my own home. Darlene looked physically ill. That was never finalized, she whispered. Claire slid over the county stamp, proving otherwise. It was finalized. It was hidden. Plant paid off. The garage was not merely protected. It held leverage over the very entrance monument Darlene used as her kingdom gate. Marlene closed the folio and said, "I believe we will be requesting an emergency board hearing Monday." Claire answered, "Good. We will attend." We. That word carried thunder. As the investigators packed evidence and Nolan escorted Todd aside for questions, I watched Darlene stare at the severed locks still sitting on the bench. Her whole empire had started unraveling from one cut chain. Then Claire leaned close enough for only me to hear and whispered, "Monday is not defense. Monday is public demolition." And standing in my father's garage, with sunlight catching dust in the air like sparks, I believed her. Monday night, the clubhouse parking lot looked like a courthouse overflow. Pickup trucks lined the curb. Luxury sedans packed the rear lot. Porch gossip had turned into standing room outrage. By the time Claire and I walked through those double doors, the room smelled of burnt coffee, copier toner, and storm pressure before lightning. Every folding chair was filled. Neighbors who had never questioned a board vote sat leaning forward with legal pads. Mrs. Donnelly was in the front row, clutching her envelope like evidence before a jury. At the long board table, Darlene looked carved from marble, trying to wear authority one last time, but the tremor in her fingers betrayed her. Todd's chair sat empty. That absence spoke loudly. I heard the low fluorescent hum overhead and felt my heartbeat in my throat. But Claire looked almost serene. She carried one banker's box and my father's survey tube under her arm, like she was bringing receipts to destiny. The acting vice president opened with routine procedural nonsense nobody cared about. Then Marlene Shaw stood, and the room changed. Tonight concerns emergency allegations involving unauthorized enforcement actions, misuse of association funds, and attempted property conversion. You could have heard a pin hit carpet. Darlene rose to object, but Marlene simply held up a hand and clicked a projector remote. First image on the screen, our garage security footage. Todd cutting the lock. Audible gasps rolled through the room. Somebody whispered, "My God." Darlene's face drained under fluorescent light. Then came the audio recording. "Take the deed files first." Her own voice answering. I watched neighbors who once praised her at cookout stare as if seeing a stranger. Claire did not move. She let the truth do the walking. Then Marlene displayed payment ledgers. Consulting fees. Reserve fund diversions. Quiet coercion dressed as compliance. Mrs. Donnelly stood up shaking and said, "She threatened my pension over a shed." That broke the room open. Voices rose. More homeowners stood. Mailbox fines. Fence threats. Suspicious liens. It was as if one confession unlocked 20. The empire was collapsing under witness. Testimony. Then Claire stepped forward carrying the survey tube. "Before this board votes," she said, "there is one property matter you should understand." She rolled my father's original easement map across the projector table, blue lines glowing under document lights. She explained the unrecorded utility corridor, the retained access rights, and the clause nobody on that board had known survived. The entrance monument, the landscaped gate Darlene treated like her crown jewel, sat partially on easement property controlled through my parcel. Murmurs became stunned silence. Claire looked directly at Darlene. "You tried to seize my garage," she said. "You did not realize my garage controls your front gate. Plant. Payoff. Perfect." Even I felt chills. Then Marlene delivered the blow. Emergency motion to suspend the board pending fraud review. Passed by voice vote, so overwhelming it sounded like thunder. Darlene tried protesting, but nobody listened. Nolan, standing quietly at the back, stepped forward when requested and collected board access keys pending investigation. No drama. Just authority. Paperwork is judgment. That was the beautiful part. Justice signed its name. As the meeting dissolved into stunned clusters, Claire placed one final document before the association attorney. Petition from homeowners to dissolve current governance structure and initiate civil claims recovery. She had signatures already. Of course she did. Darlene looked at her and whispered, "You planned all of this." Claire answered in that same calm voice that had haunted our enemies since dawn. "No, you planned it when you cut my lock." Walking out into the cool night air, hearing cicadas in the trees and neighbors calling Claire by name like she was some folk hero, I realized Monday had not been a hearing. It had been an execution carried out entirely by documents. 3 months later, the subdivision entrance looked different. Same stone monument, same wrought iron gate, but the brass plaque with Darlene's pet slogan was gone. Replaced by a simple sign the neighborhood voted on together. Willow Creek Commons. Nothing grand. Nothing pretending to be a kingdom. Funny how justice often looks. Ordinary when it settles. The fraud inquiry had widened fast. Todd vanished from every county contractor list. The old board dissolved under emergency receivership. Reserve funds were recovered. Liens against elderly homeowners were voided. The gate landscaping budget Darlene used like a private vanity project helped pay legal costs back to residents. Every piece of that machine had started coming apart the morning a bolt cutter touched my lock. But the payoff I remember most was quieter. One Saturday, I stood in the garage with the big door open, summer air carrying cut hay and motor oil, while Claire brushed sawdust off my father's workbench. Sunlight hit the old steel drawer where all this began. Same drawer they reached for. Same drawer that buried them. I asked her when she first knew they were coming for more than code violations. She smiled without looking up. "When people obsessed with control start talking about storage classifications," she said, "they are never talking about storage." That was Claire, always hearing the hidden sentence. We kept the severed lock, hung it above the bench on a nail beside my father's old recorder. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Every planted thing had come back. The chain, the recorder, the red file, the survey tube, even the old easement nobody respected until it mattered. Plant and payoff, just like my father believed life worked if you paid attention. And then came the final twist none of us saw coming. At the first homeowner election under the new association charter, neighbors nominated Claire to chair the reform committee. She refused the presidency, said power liked to rot in permanent hands. But she wrote the new enforcement rules herself. No private inspections without county authorization. No contractor actions without open vote. No fines against service members or seniors without outside review. The woman who caught intruders in our garage ended up rebuilding the rules they abused. That still makes me laugh. Darlene tried seizing a workshop and accidentally created the person who rewrote the system. One evening near sunset, I was tightening bolts on a restored carburetor when Mrs. Donnelly walked up the drive, carrying peach pie. She looked at the severed lock hanging over the bench and said, "That little thing brought down an empire." I told her no. It was not the lock. It was the mistake of thinking decent people do not fight smart. Some nights I still hear that first metallic clang in memory. Bolt cutters before dawn. Feels like another life. But then I look at the garage, smell cedar dust and oil, hear Claire inside laughing at some county memo she is marking up, and I know exactly what really happened. They thought they were breaking into a garage. They walked into a history they did not understand, a marriage they underestimated, and a trap built with patience instead of noise. Last week I drove past the entrance gate and noticed something small that made me pull over smiling. Beneath the new neighborhood sign, somebody had mounted a little brass plate. No one admitted doing it. It read, "Justice does not shout. It keeps records." That may be the truest thing I have ever seen on a piece of metal. Because in the end, nobody won with threats. Nobody won with force. A wife opened a door, told trespassers they were live on camera, and let truth do what truth eventually does. It turns the tables hard. And every time I lock that garage at night, the chain clicks shut with a sound that feels less like security and more like the final period at the end of a story my enemies wrote for themselves.